Welcome to the Indie Alt Social Club. Today I will be doing a little piece on the Hacienda nightclub and the movement they created through Manchester and through the UK. Still talked about this day. It was a very big movement at the time. Lots of bands going through there, lots of different musical movements, political movements, and I will be going through every single little bit of it. Hopefully I cover most. There's a few myths and things which go on a bit different versions of events, but I will give my take, my research on it, and where we are. So if you like this, leave it in the comments. Let me know how I got on, and if you want more exclusive content and stuff like this, then subscribe to the channel.
Tony, why bother to create the Hacienda?
Why bother? Well, it's necessary for any period to build its cathedrals.
So let's get into it. Hacienda, 1980s, Manchester, dark, gloomy, rainy, the same grim up north. And Manchester was going through a sort of industrial sort of period hangover. And what I mean by that, a lot of factory work and young people, the unemployment rate had shot up. It wasn't looking very good. And at that time, there was a band called Joy Division. Now, Joy Division basically summed up Manchester. The music was quite dark, quite depressing, even though some really good guitar riffs, some really big beats. And I am a big fan of Joy Division, but I find there's a time and a place when to listen to Joy Division. But anyway, what happened with Joy Division? So Factory Records were the label they were signed to. Factory Records was predominantly run by a guy called Tony Wilson. Now, Tony Wilson was a TV presenter for Granada Studios, and he was quite a big thing on the TV and regular, but his background was entertainment, but not so much in the music industry. And he opened up Factory Records. He took on Joy Division. Joy Division became quite successful, or very successful, should I say. But a lot of Joy Division's success come after a tragic event, and that's when Ian Curtis, the lead singer, took his own life. Now, there's lots of documentaries around that. If you choose to watch them, one called Control I've watched. It's good, but it's very bleak, and it was very sad at the time. And it caused a massive ripple through Manchester. This was one of their biggest bands. And like I said, the lead singer had took his own life. What this did, though, was the knock-on effect of Ian Curtis dying saw Joy Division's record sales soar and generated a lot of money. And Tony Wilson and other people who were involved with him, if it's Peter Gittins, I think his name is, what a DJ, famous DJ in Manchester, and a couple of others jumped in on that, and they wanted to create something. They wanted to create something within Manchester where this sort of musical youth or people could go to. Pretty much like trying to get within the Alt Social Club. If it goes as big as Hacienda, I could only dream. But basically, it was just where people could come together, and that type of music they were listening to at the time, like bands and stuff like that, and just regular pop culture come about. So, like I said, it was formed in the 1980s, and it hosted many bands, which I will go into, and even a surprise appearance by someone. Factory, Fact 51, as it was called, the Hacienda, opened its doors on 21st of May 1982. It was on Whitworth Street, and that was West Manchester. So this nightclub opens, and it was different to the others. It was a big industrial warehouse with a lot of sort of links to like hazardous things and all that, and the logos were yellow and black, like you see on the road signs. And that became the staple sort of known thing for the Hacienda and their branding. And then what happened was, the story goes that the actual ideas and all that was inspired by the former members of Joy Division. Now, there was a guy called Peter Hook, who's the bass guitarist for them. They come together and formed a band called New Order, who were also signed to Factory Records, and they'd gone out to promote their music in America. And once they were out there, they spent some time at the nightclubs over there, and there was this sort of movement going over in America, which was sort of like house music as such, and a lot of dance music, and very open clubs on multiple floors, and something the UK didn't really have. And it was more sort of seen as an inclusive place where all walks of life were going into this, rather than sort of like pocketing people into sort of like little gaps, I suppose. So what I mean by that is, like, certain types of people would only go to clubs and other people weren't welcome, and there was dress codes and all this sort of thing. That was a big thing where this was more inclusive, and they come back with the idea, and this is what they wanted to create for the Hacienda. And New Order, basically, with Tony Wilson and Factory Records, formed this club. Now, Factory Records put quite a lot of money in this club, but New Order piled a shed load of money into this club. Obviously, they were signed by Factory Records, so the music they were generating for Factory Records was being pumped into this club. The shows and the appearances they were doing were being sort of monetized then to feed into Factory Records, and then ultimately the Hacienda. So they were bleeding cash a lot, but they believed in it, and they were trying to create some sort of movement. Now, early days of the Hacienda opening, you had, like I said, bands from all walks of life and people from all walks of life. And there's a couple of mixed things about the opening day, but there is one which I've seen which is strongly linked, and this was the comedian Bernard Manning did a gig there. Now, I'm not sure if it was opening day or very, very soon, but he did a gig there. It basically didn't go down that well, and he left, and actually left his, said about his fee, and he was like, well, you're going to need this to keep this show on the road, basically. And that's what he said. But then what happened was they started taking different bookings for different people. So what happened then, bands which come through there, so New Order, The Fall, and one of the biggest ones which was there was the Smiths at this time. Now, the Smiths were obviously huge at that time, and you did have other bands like Echo and the Bunnymen were there, the Eurythmics, Culture Club did appearances there. But the Smiths and the Manchester bands, that sort of era, were the more staple people who were there. And what happened was the booking agent, they were trying to diverse a little bit. And in 1984, January, they booked a very special pop act all the way from America. And that pop act was Madonna. Now, when Madonna turns up at Manchester, let's just say the crowd was quite small. She was miming, and it was just more of a dance routine than anything else. Well, the Manchester crowd didn't realise that they were just embarking on probably one of the biggest acts the sort of history of music has ever seen in terms of a single female artist. It was huge, but at the time that wasn't seen. It didn't go down that well. But like I said, that is a bit of history for that venue. So, by the mid to late 80s, the band culture and all that was still going, but the Hacienda wasn't doing too well, and it was kind of looking at taking a different sort of turn. And what was happening at the time was there was a lot of political stuff going on. Thatcher was involved with the UK. Unemployment was at an all-time high, and again, it wasn't the best sort of culture to be in. And what come with that was the dance acid house culture. Now, that movement was sort of an escapism for people, and as the culture talks of acid house, it was very much mixing the dance and the house beats of America and Detroit to people taking ecstasy. and enjoying that kind of music with that drug-led side by it. Now, obviously, that created a massive movement and went on for years, and people were really enjoying themselves. And like I said, it was a big escapism for them. There was a lot of people, the sort of movement with bucket hats and baggy trousers and like baggy clothing. There's a sort of story to say that the Hacienda, in terms of it making money, they didn't actually make much money on stuff like drink because no one really drank there. It was just water. And the story goes that they were actually bringing in the most water into that club than anywhere in Manchester. It might even be this story about UK, but I don't think, but it was Manchester. So there'd be trucks turning up with water, and that's all anyone would ever ask for. Because it was just a place to go and dance and take pills. Now, unfortunately, what happened with that is in 1989, there was a tragic accident where a young lady who was 16 actually died. Now, that changed a lot of the landscape of that culture. There was obviously tight security around it. There was more focus on that. But what that did drive at that time was a culture where you were getting gangs into the clubs like the Hacienda, who were also sort of dealing those drugs. That come with violence, so that come with increased security, that come with police presence on there. And once that sort of movement was going away from there, which the Hacienda really built on, and you're talking like big DJs in there at the time, like Graham Park, Mike Pickering, icons of the Manchester music scene, Michael Jefferson, you were seeing then a big decline was coming back down because people were no longer taking this, or it was harder to get hold of. And the club was in a bit of disarray of where they were going to go. So they introduced a few new nights and took a bit of a different direction. There was one in particular where they had a night called Nude, I think it was. And this was sort of in the mix of it, going out of it. And there was a big sort of talk around Manchester town, like, what's this and what's that? And it was this sort of, like I said, this Detroit house coming in. But then, like I said, the decline hit so much, they actually went into more diversity and opened up as a sort of gay nightclub and did some gay nights and sort of bringing another club. And the thought process behind this was where they were probably seeing your sort of normal culture around that time. It was actually seen that this would probably take down the violence within this club because your sort of average white male wouldn't want to go there. And they did see a drop in the crime rate, and they did see a drop in the police presence, and the Hacienda had a bit of a resurgence. It was a place where people would go and feel liberated, and again, the very dance culture of the whole place. And then people getting to know about it again. It got back through the culture, and it started picking back up again. And you've got all people from all different walks of life, and the Hacienda was getting back on track, but still in a place where it wasn't making money. Now, there was bands who were still playing there, and what they had to do because of this sort of movement was they had to diverse. And the standout diversity one was the Happy Mondays. Now, the Happy Mondays incorporated indie with sort of house tracks. Now, your house tracks were predominantly sort of like mixers where you're playing drums and your big beats and everything, as opposed to your sort of electric guitars and your big drums and that side. But Happy Monday sort of fused the two together and become really successful. And they were almost like a house band within the Hacienda. There was other bands which played through there at the time, but the Happy Mondays, I was watching an interview on there, and they said they probably lived there about 5 to 6 years, even to the point where they were sort of serving behind the bar, because that's the way it was. So there's also a big myth, well, not a myth, but there's a lot of talk around the Hacienda and the Stone Roses and that big. Stone Roses were huge, absolutely huge in Manchester, but they actually didn't really play the Hacienda many times. I think it was twice. There was more bands in there. Like I said, the Smiths were there before. Primal Scream played in there. Spiral Carpets, Charlatans, and more. It was advancing then into these Britpop sort of era. Oasis played one gig there. You had Blur there. You had Suede there. You had Placebo, I believe. I even believe the Pet Shop Boys played there, and dance bands like the Shaman. But again, they were losing a lot of money, and the Hacienda was really on a decline. It kind of lost what it was over the years. And what that happens with anything, the Hacienda closed its doors, and it was the end of that movement. So we've come the end of that movement, which was 1997. The last people to play there was a group called Spiritualized. It closed its doors. Like I said, there was too much sort of decline of it. The drug scene was dying off. The police presence, which was concentrated on there and stopping that kind of culture, was going. Music was moving in different directions, and like I said, it suddenly just closed its doors, and they essentially ran out of money. So what happened to the Hacienda next? So the Hacienda was demolished, and in 2002 it was built into a set of apartments, which still, as far as I'm aware, sit in Manchester to this day, which is called the Hacienda Apartments. So the days of baggy trousers, the sort of indie bands which are there, the bucket hats, the branding of the yellow and black still lives on, and the global culture of what it created and the movement, and people still talking about it to this day, like myself. But you've got to remember what that was for Manchester at that time. It was huge, and like I said, the likes of Madonna were there. The Smiths made their name there, but like I said, like any good thing, it usually fades, or any movement never lasts forever, and that is what happened with the Hacienda. Now, I've only touched on there briefly. There is a lot of documentaries you can watch on this movement. There is documentaries even made on Tony Wilson. The Stone Roses were involved. There's Blood on the Turnstiles. It was such a big thing within the UK and within Manchester at that time. So just check it out if you have a sort of intriguement, I suppose is the only way I could say it, for this movement. Then go and touch it out and have a look. Hacienda, Fact 51, the club lost a fortune, absolute fortune, but also give us a fortune back, and like I said, created that movement. Myself wasn't really old enough to be in the thick of it, but like I said, it's just an iconic story, an iconic moment in time, so we couldn't not do a piece on it. Now, in terms of us, the Indie Alt Social Club, like I said, it is something we're trying to create a little bit of a movement within the indie culture, trying to get that band culture back to where it is. So a little bit of help from yourselves. If you like this, make comments below. If you want to see more content like this, let us know. In terms of the actual YouTube channel, if you could hit like and subscribe if you did, because that's got to keep us going. The more subscriptions we've got, the more chance we can make content, the more we can then give back. And our mission really is to inspire people into this music, create more fans into this music, give a bit back to the bands. Like, we're going around touring the bands. Obviously, we're paying for tickets at the moment, which long we'll try and continue. But also, we're trying to make something on this as well. And the more we go with that, we'll actually keep that in, shall we? So the more we go with that, where the cat wants to get in, the more we keep it up. But yeah, like I said, Indie Alt Social Club, give us a follow, let us know what you think, and I hope you enjoyed this segment.